not only our ILAC members, but also a number of distinguished guests and friends, but also, and this is the first time for ILAC, student audiences in Tunis and Uppsala who are standing by thanks to this live stream, video streaming, and which will pose questions during the session. It is part of every ILAC AGM to organize a session where we bring in outside experts, top-notch experts, to brief us on legal and political issues with relevance to our work, which will help us to improve our results. This is the 10-year anniversary of ILAC. And for this special session, we have managed to put together an extraordinary qualified panel for a topic which is presently on the top priority for ILAC, and that is what's happening in the countries of the Arab Spring. The topic of today's session is legal reform and the Arab Spring. Is there a role for the international community? And the panel that we have managed to put together is Mr. Samir Annabi, who is a renowned Tunisian lawyer, until recently heading the Training Institute for Tunisian Lawyers, but recently appointed to be the head of the newly created Anti-Corruption Agency. We also have Ambassador Jan Thesleff, who is the Swedish ambassador to Libya and Tunisia, the special representative of the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs to the Syrian Democratic Opposition, and previously Swedish ambassador to Saudi Arabia, Yemen, Kuwait, Oman, I may have forgotten some country, and Raji Sourani, who is an old friend and who is the president of the Arab Organization for Human Rights, and also the executive director for the Palestinian Center for Human Rights, which is a long-time ILAC member. The session is chaired or moderated by Todd Benjamin, who I don't think requires any additional presentation. Todd is well known since many years as CNN anchor correspondent and is well known for interviews that he made with Gorbachev, Bill Clinton, and other world figures. Todd, we're very happy to have you here, and as you say in your media, over to you, Todd.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you for all being here, and for our students and professors listening from Tunisia. Fantastic to have you here, and also the students from Uppsala University. And I urge all of you who are listening via the web to please submit questions. We want to keep the panel very busy. I also want to urge all of you in the audience here to ask questions, and please don't wait until towards the end of the discussion. From the very beginning, I want hands to go up if you agree with something, disagree. We'll get the mic to you, but I want to turn this whole room into a panel, because one of the great strengths, if we're going to talk about democracy and justice systems, is having a very open debate. Obviously, we're in a very fluid situation in the Middle East, and each country, I think, in many ways are at different phases, be it Tunisia, Libya, Egypt, and of course, the very serious fallout we're seeing and tragic events that we're seeing in Syria right now. Briefly, I'm going to ask our panelists, very briefly, to give their sense of what they think is going on and potentially what can be done, although I'd rather leave the latter part for discussion. So, Samir, your initial thoughts.
Well, thank you, Todd. I was wondering why I should talk first. Is it because it's in Tunisia where all started, or is it because of my age?
Not because of her age. If we're going on age, I think I would probably be speaking first. Okay, go ahead. Yeah.
So, what happened in Tunisia was very curious phenomenon, because until December of 2010, all international bodies, institutions, even some of the major Western powers.
I'm sorry, Samir. We're having some technical problem here. See, in television, for all these years I worked, you can have it all right editorially, and then the technology can always mess with you. So, please, let's try it again.
So, what happened in Tunisia a little over 1 year ago was very surprising to everybody, including Tunisians, because until perhaps the month of November, December of 2010, all concerned international bodies, institutions, friends of Tunisia were praising what's taking place in Tunisia, praising the economic development, the social development, education, the position of women within the society, etc. And then, within less than 1 month, all things collapsed. Fortunately, it was a revolution, a peaceful revolution. Well, when there is only one casualty, it's certainly something hard to take. But in Tunisia, if we may talk about the relative number of casualties, about 350 altogether, we should be happy when we compare to what's happening today in other parts of the region, including countries where the revolution is more or less after the initial stage. I mean, Libya or Egypt, we still have casualties, where in Tunisia things have rather settled well. This was an evolution of a younger generation which could no longer take the misbehaving of the dictators in the area, not only politically speaking, but also economically speaking, because there was no equal or just distribution of wealth. So this young generation, perhaps using one of the best ways of communications of today, that is the social networks, came together and without going into violence, succeeded in overthrowing the power in Tunisia, at least. Lawyers played a major role in this revolution because first they were the last square of democracy in the country. The only elections that took place in Tunisia until 2010 were the elections for the Bar Association. Democratic elections, and whenever the political power tried to intervene, it was a real success for democracy, and they never succeeded in doing or intervening or influencing the outcome of the elections. So perhaps this gave them enough strength and power to go ahead when the first steps of the revolution appeared, and they went down to the street, protected the population, spoke to the president of the country and asked him to stop all kind of violence. And then, just after the few first steps of the revolution, they took over to promote new institutions to make sure the transition goes quietly. And they succeeded in setting up a few institutions One is for the realization or achievement of the goals of the revolution. One is for preparing elections, free elections, and for the first time we had these elections last October, and we have now an elected constituent assembly which is writing the constitution for the new Tunisia. Other administrative commissions investigating all abuses of power under the old regime and during the revolution.
So quite a bit has happened since that one person, the fruit seller.
Yes, indeed. It was a symbol of the revolution, but
Absolutely.
things have been accumulating for the past few years.
And what's interesting, we call it the Arab Spring, but Ronnie, for anyone who doesn't know Ronnie's background, he has been a long-time champion of human rights in the region, facing a lot of adversarial positions, both sometimes from the West and within the Arab community as well. And when they talk about the Arab Spring, I find it almost for you an ironic phrase because you've been working on this for years. Your perspective.
Thank you, Todd. In 1983, Arab organizations and rights were established, and it was established by very prominent figures who are working in the region for rule of democracy and the human rights, who were suppressed, oppressed deeply by these dictatorships for a long period of times. And in a very unfortunate way, in Kafka way, the first meeting wasn't held in any of the 22 Arab states. They were forced to go to Limassol, Cyprus, to have their first meeting. Since then, these people, were struggling, striving for rule of law, democracy, human rights, and the dignity of the Arab citizen. None of them, with this level of suppression, oppression, believe that they will live the day till they see the Arab Revolution prevails. And for me, this was a dream of my life. I never ever thought in my age I would witness such wonderful, fantastic revolution where the slogans, where those pioneers for tens of years raised, struggled, some of them passed away, died, kidnapped, tortured, or imprisoned. It will come and we see such wonderful scene in Tunisia, the narcissist revolution, this wonderful revolution which deposed one of the most serious dictatorships, which the West very unfortunately considered the model for ruling for the region. And then it was followed by moving the pyramids after 7,000 years. And we have an end for one of the most brutal regimes in the area and the biggest country of the region, which will affect not, only Egypt, but regionally wise, and then followed by the Tunisia, etc. Many look to the revolution as one act. We finished from these dictatorships, the regime doesn't exist anymore, and we made it. That's not true. Struggling for rule of law, human rights, democracy, for the dignity of the man, it's a process. Many are confused about what's going on in the region, but that's, from my perspective, very natural, very real. It's not artificial at all. For one reason, that this is a process. This is real chemistry working among political parties, and also among social components, and it will work, hopefully, in a positive way. For the first time ever, we have the chance to decide our destiny and our future.
When you say that many are confused about what's going on in the region, what are you suggesting there?
Many say, oh, Islamists took over. Look, I mean, this region, everybody was talking about revolution, but Islamists taking over, as if the Islamists are devil. They are not recognizing them as real, genuine part of the political movement in the region. They existed for 80 years. They are part of us, part of the political movement in the region. And when they struggled for democracy and human rights, they were suppressed, oppressed like us. They were killed like us. And when the revolution, which they were genuine part of it prevailed, they had, I mean, to go and compete exactly as what had happened in Palestine very early in 2008 January, and like what had happened, the same thing in Tunisia or in Egypt or in Morocco most recently. So this confusion, what I'm saying that the Islamists are there, the Islamists are part of the political component. This confused many as they consider there is real setback for the revolution because Islamists are there.
Let me ask you, Jan, because I know you want to make a couple comments, but I think actually, Raji makes a fantastic point in terms of our perception of what it really means to have a democracy and whether or not, in a sense, we have a double standard about what this means to have a democracy when those leading what becomes a democracy may not be what we want always in the West.
You want me to comment on that, or you want me to make my own remarks?
You can make your own remarks and then comment on that. Comment on that first and then make your own remarks, yeah?
No, but I think that actually what has been said here and what is the theme of today's seminar is what are the legal reform, what will be the framework, the future framework of the region. And I think that that's what, if you talk about the role of the international community, which is the theme of today's exercise, is also to see how one can assist in making such a framework in place, a democratic framework, elections, what will come out of them, what will come out of the system, that's something for the countries. I mean, that's part of the whole democratic game. But if you allow me, I will say a few initial words myself. I was in a seminar similar to this one in Tunis a few months ago. And just after finishing my remarks, a Tunisian lady activist comes up to me. And she says, you, Ambassador, you speak of the Arab Spring as if it was a season. But actually, it is a process. And those words stuck with me and have stuck with me ever since. The spring might have come to an end, but the process has just started. And we will see changes. We have seen changes. We will see changes over a number of years. We see the constitutional process mentioned in Tunisia. We see transitional justice. We see legal reform in the wider sense of the word. And the Arab world and those who have gone through this revolution, they are not one. There are different stories in different countries. The stories differ. There is in some countries where there was actually the institutional backbone was there. Maybe it's more of a software change. And there are places in the region where it's both hardware and software. But in all the cases, it's a transformation. And it's also very much about restoring trust in the institutions and in those who govern them. Political will, I think, at the end, and that was what I started with, political will actually determine how things will go. And that would be the prospect for success, but also the potential for support from the international community. Because we all know that armed conflict, you need some kind of peace dividends after a conflict comes to an end. But also revolutions need revolution dividends. And one of those dividends could be legal reform. It could be the fight against corruption, for example. It could be to put in place transparent systems. That's tangible dividends for people. But once again, political will, there is no one-size-fits-all. There is no prêt-à-porter, as they say in French. And we have to let it take time. The revolutions came quickly. Tunisia, 1 month. Libya, much longer. Egypt, a little bit longer. But we need time for all the rest of the consolidation.
tens of years.
Yes.
It's not a month or a year. It's tens of years.
Tens of years. So I think both of you raise a very important point, which is that we talk about the Arab Spring, but as the young woman told you in Tunisia, and as you said in your opening remarks, that it's not just one spring, but this is part of a very long process. And you think that this is going to take decades. Where, in your estimation, do you think the greatest challenges lie in terms of making this transition from basically having dictatorships to building democracies? Where's the biggest immediate challenges that you see, Raji?
Simply, we want to that part of the word, rule of law, democracy, and the human rights. Nothing less, nothing more. And this is, I mean, the really challenge for everybody, for us. Now, in the region, it's not a matter of technicalities. It's a matter of political will and the determination to go all the way along with this process. But very unfortunately, once and again, we are having this double standard, I mean, with us. Meaning, Bahrain, what had happened in it? There was a revolution against this king. Saudi Arabia, Jordanian forces get into there and they invaded and they took over and they suppressed the revolution. Conspiracy of silence. No word about that. Yeah. 2, Yemen. What had happened there? Fantastic revolution. Strong revolution. Thousands paid their life. But in the end, what had happened? Reconciliation and agreement mediated by the Gulf Council and Saudi Arabia, and they provided full amnesty and immunity for the president and his aides who committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, and presidential elections for one president, I mean, to be elected. And where are the young revolutionaries? Any of them has been appointed, elected, or part of the picture? No, it has been assassinated. Syria, and what's happening there? I mean, in it. It's very Kafka. You have the NATO intervention in Libya, and you have the physical power imposed there on the Libyan regime till it was ousted. But in Syria, we cannot intervene. Not because of the Syrian people, not because of the Syrian democracy, but it's much more complicated political calculations, including Israel and including Iran.
So what you're suggesting is that there are regional forces which, in a sense, are working against democracy, and, of course, forces in the West which are impeding democracy. Would you agree with that assessment? Because, Jan, you said there are software and hardware changes depending on which country that you're in.
And in some countries, there are both.
Yep.
But I think that what was said here, and I think that's very true, you see it in, that's something that characterizes all the changes, is that those who were part of the revolution, those who were standing on the barricades, are not necessarily there when the political process starts. I mean, there were men and women, young men, young women, and when you look at the electoral lists, you don't find those young men and women on the lists.
Why not?
I think this is maybe something that will hit back in the end, because one of the things that I think is very important for a successful transition is to have an inclusiveness. But we must also remember that maybe things are not working the way we thought they did in the past. Because when I speak to young Libyans and to young Tunisians, some of them, they say, we don't want to get engaged in politics, but we will be there anyway. We were there during the revolution, and in the run-up to the revolution, we were the watchdogs. We were the ones who were the whistleblowers. And if we can have a transparent system that will allow us to follow what goes on, we will continue to do that. It's somehow the WikiLeaks generation, or following things from afar, even though you're not a candidate. So maybe there are alternative ways. The social media were part of the, let's say, the tools used. This is a new generation. but they have to be on board. Otherwise, I think it will be regretted in the future.
But can they be on board without being politically involved? Because what you're suggesting is that many of them are taking a wait-and-see attitude, and then they will decide whether or not they become politically involved instead of there being the leaders. You want to comment on that? And then, Raji, you want to say something? And Samir, also know you want to join in on this. Yeah.
I think they should be politically involved in a way, but on the other hand, many of these countries come out of systems where they haven't had a free political life. And it's very short time has passed since they went through the revolutionary change. People don't instantly become politicians or politically involved. Maybe we need that process. It's an educational process. It's a cultural process that has to go through. And I'm sure they will come around eventually.
Samir, your thoughts?
It should be a state of mind rather than looking what happened here and there. There is a new state of mind. The younger generation are in the process of assimilating this new situation, and I am sure they will end up taking over the decision making in those countries.
Are you optimistic the way that Samir is?
I'm full of optimism.
Fantastic.
I think we are tomorrow, not yesterday. Okay. But I want to say something regarding young generation. Who made this revolution? The old? Our generation? No, we cannot claim that. This is not a virtual revolution. This is a real revolution. Who made it? The young. They are the ones who had the fourth dimension, and they were able to bear their freedom, blood, suffering, because they have it on their skins. They are much more daring than us. They are more courageous than us, and they wanted to have the risk on their skin, and they made it. Now, there is exclusion. I'm saying there is exclusion, but freedom never ever can be granted for people. You take it, you make it. You take it from the lion mouth. And that's what they did, I mean, with this revolution. And that's why these young people, whether we like it or not, tomorrow will be theirs, and the one will take over.
Nick, do you have a comment, question? Yeah.
Yes, thanks very much, Todd. My name's Nick Stewart. I'm from England, as you probably already guessed after a few words. But I'd just like to move from Kafka to Pandora, if you like. When you open the box, which is what you gentlemen referred to, when you open the box marked democracy, what jumps out is, by definition, not controllable, except by the people who are voting in the places where you've got your democracy, and we know it's the worst system there is except for all the others. So my question is, given that this unruly horse, to change the metaphor, is let loose, I wonder if there are, just looking ahead, particular areas, and I mean both areas of human life and society and activity, and or geographical areas, where there are particular areas where you would have, let's say, special anxieties about how it might work out, about how this unruly horse then would run. I'd be interested to know that.
We love to have, in that part of the world, what they call it arranged marriages.
All right.
Everything in advance, the bridegroom and the bride, and you know, the family, the father, the mother, everything arranged. The West love to have these stable dictatorships. And they are the one who supported it all the way long. Though they knew they are oppressing us, suppressing us, killing us, blacklisting us. We as a human rights activists all the way long classified as terrorists by the entire ministers of justice in the Arab world in official protocols of the Arab League. And these regimes were supported entirely. Democracy had happened in Sri Lanka. It happened in Indonesia, in India. Why it's Banadora just in our case? We are not subhumans. I think we are really human beings, part of the world community. We can deliver democracy. We need just time and opportunity. If we didn't make the revolution, well-deserved, you know, you deserve that because you don't cry, really cry. And when we make it, well, you know, this is the chemistry I'm talking about. I think it's our entire full right and obligation to go with this process all the way along and to make this region better and much more beautiful.
Jan, your response to Nick's question.
You know, I think that the confusion, if we should call it confusion, or the tensions, the arguments, the fighting, it's very healthy. I mean, something that should be there. That's part of democracy. It's part of the process, coming out of a process where, or a situation where nothing was allowed, and suddenly a lot is allowed. And if people were too orderly and too much agreeing on everything, I would get suspicious. I mean, when I go to Tunisia, if I go to Libya and I hear people discussing, even if they sometimes get a little bit unruly in their arguments, I think it's very healthy. And I think that many of these, let's say, what we are seeing now, hopefully, will be channeled into a strong civil society at the end, maybe into political movements when elections come up. I mean, this is a sign of health.
I totally share your point of view, and sometimes I suffer from some politicians we hear from time to time asking to have a unity, to have a national goal shared by everyone. That's the danger if we go back to the one single interest, one single voice, one single party. So we have to live within this contradiction, and from the contradiction will come the light.
Nick, of course, is making the point that democracy may not be the best system, but it's the best system devised yet. And when you let Pandora out of the box, you can have a certain amount of chaos. And in the West, we can misinterpret that. And so, in a sense, when we ask about this debate itself, the legal community and the Arab Spring, what should the international community's response be? In a sense, I think what you're really saying, Raji, is leave us alone. Let us get on with it.
No.
Don't interfere.
If you want to intervene to apply international law, international humanitarian law, human rights, rule of law. Fantastic. That's what we want to see. We don't want rule of jungle anymore. We want rule of law at that part of the world. What we are having on our skin, the rule of jungle as far, supported by the West. Both ways, by Israel and by the Arab dictatorships. I mean, this entire thing in the Arab-Palestinian conflict, what we want? International law, international humanitarian law, and the human rights to be applied. What we want in the Arab region, rule of law. Just as simple as such. We want the West to support these fundamental bases on the basis of rule of law and the human rights.
How can the legal community, the people sitting here who have gone into many civil societies after they've had civil wars to rebuild justice systems, how can they support that? I realize that in Tunisia, of course, they're there to help rebuild justice systems. But outside formal organizations like ILAC, how can the international legal community support the rule of law?
They are not newcomers to the region, and they are not newcomers and new connections to us. Our relation with such international organizations, precisely ILAC in this example, very deep, very long, very respected. They are the ones who are talking the same language like us. And that's why we consider ourselves very genuine part of this, and that's why we resort them in providing us with more of technical expertise, of resources, etc. I'm not talking about these international bodies. They are there. They need to be supported by their governments because they are doing the right work. Our problem, not with these international organizations who are calling for rule of law and the human rights, but with the governments who take the double standards. This is the genuine problem.
This is the problem, and I don't think anyone here would disagree with what you've said, but at the same time, as long as the West has its own self-interest or its own double standard, to use your language, how can there ever be the element of trust, which we spoke about in the beginning, or confidence to make that transition to democracy when we see such behavior from the West?
Well, I don't think, for example, Hillary Clinton is the spokeswoman on behalf of the Arab Revolution. I don't know why every day she making that statement on behalf of Tunisia or on behalf of Egypt revolution or this or that. But I'm wondering, I mean, what we are saying, very simple. If the West, who supported these dictatorships for a long time, consider it real partners for them, now they moved. They don't exist anymore. But at the same time, they are having a new partnership in human rights and democracy with the region, with Saudi Arabia, with Qatar, against Syria, for example. This is Kafka, again, because we are talking about real revolution in Syria, and we are talking about people who are paying their blood and soil every day. And at the same time, in Saudi Arabia, where women cannot have a driving license, advocating for human rights and rule of law and democracy in Syria. I mean, it's very Kafka situation. They have to be reconciled. They have to act according to standards. Just to say we are for the rule of law and for democracy.
Jan, you want to, as somebody from the West, do you want to respond to what Raji is saying here? Because there is a double standard. There are self-interests that the West has, and they don't always align properly when you have a different outcome than the one that you would like. For instance, when Hamas won the elections in Palestine. Yeah.
But definitely we all have our own interests. I mean, I think that's part of the political field or sphere, for sure, and people act according to their own interests. But I must say that I think that in the case of the Arab Spring, what we have seen, if we call it Arab Spring, maybe it's not a good name, maybe it's more the revolution for dignity and freedom that we should talk about. But I think that there has been a push when it comes to actually supporting these countries, be it Tunisia, be it Libya, be it Syria in the case where they are, at the stage where they are, when it comes to Egypt. I think that there is a shift when it comes to this. And there is, as was said by my colleague initially, if we had been meeting here in December 2010, and we had looked at all the different sources that were predicting the developments, look at the failed state index published by Foreign Policy, for example, 177 countries. Tunisia was very far down the line. Egypt very far down the line. Syria was also very far down the line on that. It's very easy to look back and say what happened was actually inevitable because it already happened. But when looking ahead, when making our assessments of what is possible, what is not possible, it's sometimes not impossible, but apparently it was very difficult to predict what was going to happen.
I do fully agree. I mean, nobody can predict what had happened, but we are talking about the double standard of the West, how can be interpreted. Once again, to the point, because we have to have concluding lesson. We are living in a very political moment, juncture in the region. A new vision, a new position should be taken, I mean, towards what had happened. I will remind everybody here of our elections January 2008. That was the very early spring of the Arab world. We made it under occupation, under belligerent occupation. And we were the first democracy in the region. But, and the entire world, I mean, witnessed these elections and they said it's healthy, transparent, and right. Now, these elections hasn't been recognized because they said it resulted Islamist, Hamas. We cannot recognize it. This product, the West don't like it. And they don't respect the will of the Palestinian people who elected them in a free democratic elections. Now, just 1 minute, please. Now, in the entire region, in Morocco, you have Islamist government. In Tunisia, you have Islamist government. In Libya, you have Islamist government. And in Egypt, should be Islamist government, according to the majority of the parliament. are the West going to recognize these governments or not? And if you recognize these, and these are Islamists, and I'm telling you, the Islamists will reign this entire region for the coming 20 years at least, what the position would be. Once again, anti-Islamist, anti-democracy, anti-the will of the people in the region, or you have to act according to the rule of law and according to the will of the people.
Are you comfortable having the Islamists in majority in all the countries that Raji just mentioned?
Islamists coming through democracy.
Yeah.
Of course, when there is when I go to Tunisia, I meet the legally elected government by the Tunisians in free and fair elections. Of course, I meet with them.
We have questions here. We also are getting questions from our students in Tunisia, which is fantastic. And one of them was, and this is to you, Samir, are some Islamist parties doing well in part because they do not exclude young people? It's a very interesting point.
Well, it's political point of view. I think so. I think so because so far we have had some rather open parties in Tunisia, including youth, including women. Some others more restricted, more elitists, I would think, more closer to the Western culture than the Tunisian culture, which is in between, middle of the way. So perhaps so.
And there are a couple other questions here. We'll just get through them very quickly, and then we'll go to the floor. Another one from you, from Tunisia, from Salma Khalid. What do you, Mr. Annabi, think about the judiciary regarding the conflictual situation of the judges and the actual government institutions?
Well, this is a long, long story. I've been living...
Give me the short version. It's okay. You know.
I have been living within the judiciary for many, many years. Grown up in a family of judges and lawyers, so since my very young age, I've lived in this community. And I believe that at one point, the political power succeeded in taming the judiciary, which became an instrument within the hands of the political power, executing its decisions, satisfying the interests of the ruling family, etc., etc. So to make it change is a very important thing. But instead of instituting schools for training of judges, schools for training of lawyers to promote the independent way of thinking that must prevail within the judiciary, rather we trained people who can easily obey. So to change this, there should be certainly a long debate, and this debate is taking place. I would say that the three major components of the legal society in Tunisia, that is the university, the judiciary, and also the legislative power, there is a fight going on between them. And the international community has, I believe, to do something to bring those components together and have civilized discussion.
And Salma has a follow-up question from Tunisia, and it's in a sense in the same vein, although different parties here. What about the independence of the Attorney General, the Parquet, Mr. Parquet, regarding the supervision of the Minister of the Justice in Tunisia?
Well, again here we inherited a system which is copied on the French system. And it's a matter of choice. It has to be decided from the political powers in Tunisia, basically the people through the Constituent Assembly. They have to make a choice, but this choice has been there for many, many years. And even France itself is thinking of changing the system of the procureur in order to get an independent attorney general speaking for the people and not a minister of justice. Thank you.
All right, Nina, you've been waiting patiently. Then Juan has a question in the back. I think we have one right here. And Christian, you also have one. Yeah.
Nina Lahoud, I'm an ILAC member. Both Mr. Sourani and Mr. Annabi have powerfully indicated that it really was the voice of youth and their electronic words that unleashed the Arab Spring in so many areas. At the same time, you've indicated that as the transitional process is unfolding and the more formal electoral processes emerge, will we see some of these same youth and revolutionaries rising to the top and becoming part of that process? My question is, in terms of the youth and the revolutionaries, I'd like to know how you feel, whether you feel the role of women, young girls, and women, what role they played both in the youth movement and beyond. I myself was glued to the television, and at the beginning, in looking where are those women, then seeing them accompanying men and their families, etc. But really, in this rebuilding process, it's often an unprecedented opportunity to now use underutilized capacities of women and girls in this rebuilding process. What is your view about whether we're going to see that? And secondly, a quick question. Mr. Sourani, you've mentioned basically the panorama of countries in the region. You as a prominent voice of human rights in the Middle East and the Palestinians, do you think the Arab Spring will hit in a peaceful way the Palestinian territories, and are you optimistic in what that might bring in terms of fueling the negotiation process to a peaceful outcome?
So two questions there. One about the role of women, and secondly about the future of the Palestinians. Yeah.
Well, to take the women role in society, I think this is no longer a problem in Tunisia. Only 2 months after the independence of Tunisia in 1956, we enacted a code of family law which granted very important, it was a revolution in itself, and it granted many rights to the women, equivalent rights, I would say. But unfortunately, this happened in every sector except in the political sector. And this now should perhaps be extended to the political sector. We did a little bit about it when preparing for the new election law by imposing lists of equivalent number of women and men. But the outcome of the election was that women got only about 1/3 of the votes of the seats in the parliament. But we still have to work on it. But the women are not being granted these rights. They are gaining their rights. Because we have about 55% of the people graduating from the university today are women. We have 40% of the judges are women. 35% of lawyers are women. So they are gaining their own, and they need no gifts.
But Tunisia, in a sense, is much further ahead than some other Arab countries. And even when it had a dictatorship, women played a more prominent role.
It started before the dictatorship.
Absolutely. Yeah. Okay, yeah. Raji, you want to say something? Yes, yeah.
Well, let me put it this way. The smartest yet in the Arab world who were able to recruit and empower women are the Islamist movement. And that's very obvious in the elections. They use every single vote and they pick real candidates for elections. And they made it. I mean, you know, wherever, I mean, these elections had happened. Very unfortunately, the left and the seculars vocally were talking about women. Practically, this hasn't been implemented. Very unfortunately, once and again, those who succeeded in doing this, the Islamists. Now, this is increasing more and more, and I hope that, you know, secular and leftist get some jealousy, but in the end of the day, this is decision not related to civil society or human rights organizations or rule of law agencies. This is something related to the political parties and the movement of the society.
Yeah, and you want to make a quick comment, and then I want you to make a quick comment on her second question, which about the possibility of the Palestinians also participating in the Arab Spring beyond the 2008 election.
Yeah. Very quick. I'd just like to quote what you said before. I think that tomorrow is today when it comes to the women's participation. And I think you are fully right that there is an historic opportunity with these changes also to change the logic of how society, civil society, politics are run. And so, and that is something, that's why it's so important to raise these issues, not after the revolution is finished, not after the political process is started and finished. We should start that discussion and that support for those issues before.
How can the international community help support this?
I think we can do it in many ways, but it depends, of course, also on the national context. And if you talk about a country like Tunisia, for example, they had an advanced structure in many ways. But of course, there are in support to women's projects, to NGOs, how we can empower women by bringing them also into networks with foreign counterparts. And I don't mean Swedish or Western necessarily, but maybe the exchange within the region. I think it's more easy for a Libyan woman to associate herself with a Tunisian woman than maybe with someone from my country. So in network building and in supporting that kind of processes, we can do a lot.
That's very interesting in terms of the point about interregional. Yeah.
Since the Nakba, 1948, Palestinians are in their worst situation ever, and the worst yet to come. Meaning, Gaza, it's almost like Animal Farm, sieged, closed, no movement for goods or individuals, and we are punished because of the elections till today. And we are paying dearly for that. This is entire shame not only on Israel, but on international community to institutionalize the siege on Gaza. The second thing, it's related to Jerusalem. Jerusalem almost having ethnic cleansing, Judaization, and nothing left to be negotiated about. Settlements, vertically, horizontally expanding, everyday new settlements, and they are connected by pass roads, and its mission impossible even to stop that. The wall, in a few months, this annexation apartheid wall, which the ICJ ruled of its illegality, asked international community to dismantle it. It's going to be accomplished very soon. What we are talking about, 4,700 Palestinian prisoners subjugated to torture, maltreatment, etc. Coming. No, but I mean 1 minute. 4,700 Palestinian political prisoners there. They are maltreated, tortured, in isolation, in administrative detention, etc. Now they are, some of them, in their 70th day of hunger strike, and that's fueling the entire Palestinian street. Now, having all these injustices on your skin, on day-to-day basis, and above that, there is no hope of tomorrow, because every day passes, means more suffering and more suppression, more oppression. And you have a state of clinical death for peace process, and nobody convinced there is any peace process at that part of the world. It's only a new brand of apartheid. With that, you are having the Arab Spring, meaning we are punished because we practice democracy. 2, there is no peace at that part of the world. 3, there is rule of jungle towards Palestinians. What message you are conveying to the Arab world, to these revolutions, to the people in the Arab world? No one in the Arab world not in support for Palestinian cause. No one. Right, left, Marxist, Islamist, men, women, and they take the Palestinian-Israeli conflict the standard for the West. As far the West providing full legal political immunity for the state of Israel, as this new brand of apartheid going on, as the suffering of the Palestinian people going on, I think this will bring, in the foreseeable future, much more violence to to the region, especially to the Palestinian-Israeli conflict.
Okay. Juan, you have a question, then Christian has a question, and we have one right here. Sally, yeah.
Good afternoon, Juan Ben Nazar from San Juan, Puerto Rico. One of the last great liberators of the 20th century, the late Mujibur Rahman, father of the independence of Bangladesh, once stated, and forgive me if I don't quote verbatim, words to this effect: it takes one kind of people to liberate a country and another kind to run the government. Now, I have a twofold question for the entire panel. Number one, do you agree or disagree with that view of the late Mujibur Rahman? And number two, some of the political movements that have been mentioned, like the Islamist or Hamas or Fatah, do you perceive them as liberators or as government administrators, or both, and why? Thank you.
That's terrific questions. Who wants to take that?
For the second, of
Yeah.
course, they are liberators. We don't view them as government. And they are, genuine part of struggle against, the occupation and for the freedom of Palestinian people, for right of self-determination and independence. And I have to remind you, at the end of the day, we are still, very, very occupied people. So it's part of the liberation movement. We don't view them or deal with them as government. Concerning the first question, of course, I fully agree that the revolution is one act, but what is most important, the chemistry after the revolution, that you guarantee tomorrow is better and more beautiful.
Jan, your thoughts?
Yeah, I also agree. I think that, first of all, there is a distinct difference between the revolutionary phase and what comes after, which hopefully will be the result of a democratic process, which revolutions not always are. So the democratic process will lead up that other people are elected. So there is a distinct difference. But that puts a pressure on those who are elected to be inclusive, because if you forget those who made the change and who made democracy possible, elections possible, then you'll be in trouble.
Christian, Alan.
Well, if I may add one word. In my opinion, we cannot distinguish between the two types of people. Even administrators should be militants. And every person within the country has the right to participate in running the country. That's
okay.
Christian Holland, ILAC Executive Director. After a very chaotic process, there now seems to be two main contenders for the presidency in Egypt, who squared off in a duel yesterday. Abdul Futu, who seems to be a moderate Islamist, and Amr Moussa, former Secretary General of the Arab League, who is secular. If these are the two candidates, and depending on who would win the election, what predictions can you make about Egypt's attitude towards the West and towards Israel?
First, I agree usually with you on everything except moderate and not moderate Islamist. I think, this is the will of the people, and as far people elected in democratic process, they are fine. I would say Islam, which comes through democratic process, and that would be respected fully from my perspective, not the Islamists who impose by force, by terrorism, Bin Laden style, things. Now, regarding Abu al-Futuh and Amr Moussa, I think both are just wonderful statesmen. And they are real, they are genuine, they know what democracy, rule of law, and human rights means. They experience, in their life, for example, Abu al-Futuh, he was vice president of National Egyptian when he was at Cairo University Student Council. And he was the president of the Egyptian new Student Council, and his deputy was one of the candidates, Hamdin Sabbahi, who is Nazareth, actually. So you are talking about somebody, who's open-minded, real, experienced. He know what democracy, what elections, and all his speeches for election campaign, his program, very eloquent, democratic. Hardly I find anything really to criticize. I mean, theory or in practice. But for me, I mean, he's just fantastic. Of course, Amr Moussa, he's first-class jurist before he's, you know, foreign minister and general secretary of the Arab League. But he's one of those who went when he was secretary general for the Arab League, which is just 100 meters away from Tahrir Square. And when he get there, he was raised on the shoulders of the revolutionaries. And that was very clear message where he stands. I mean, at very crucial time that might cost him his entire political career. So we are talking about both who are real, committed for basic fundamental issues, and the difference for me hardly to exceed 5% between the two of them. And that's, I would be feeling great, happy, if, you know, any of them make it, and I don't think there will be any major differences reflect to politics if any of them has been elected.
But Raji, if I understand from what you've been saying all along, do you really care who's elected as long as you have a democratic process?
Absolutely not.
Exactly, and that's the point, right?
Absolutely not. I am committed to standards.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, on your perspective, because I think part of Christian's question was really, who do you favor if you do favor someone? Not that I can imagine him as an ambassador coming out and say you favor one over the other, but in terms of anti-Western rhetoric, I think that's what Christian's concern is, because if you look at Egypt compared to Libya or Tunisia, there's a lot more anti-Western rhetoric.
Todd, I think that when looking in the Egyptian crystal ball, I will leave that to my colleagues from the region, because seeing from the vantage point of Tunis, from Tripoli or from Stockholm, I think I would not be able to make anyone see any clearer. So I give the floor to Samir, if you allow me.
That's very diplomatic.
Thank you.
You're allowed one diplomatic answer for your last one.
And this is
And
it.
he has just taken it. Okay, yeah.
This is the question. We said always, we want judgment based on standards, not where you belong. And this is our criticism, actually, for Western politics.
Yeah, it's seen through the eyes of the West, not seen through the region itself.
Yeah.
As you fight for democracy, we do fight for democracy also. We would like to have the people tell its will, and that the will of the people will prevail.
Okay, Sally.
I'm Sally Swartz. I'm the American Bar Association representative to ILAC. And since we're all in the legal world here, and those on the phone and TV, I'd like to ask a question. Words are important, and some of the confusion that you alluded to earlier, Raj, I think comes from the use of words which people don't understand or have their own interpretations. So I'd like to ask each of the panelists, or at least the two of you from the Arab world, could you define Islamist for us? Thank you.
You are asking very difficult question, because they ask who's the Jew, and yet, I mean, nobody answered that. So why you are asking who's the Islamist? Well, I mean, no. I'm saying very legitimate question. I mean, yet there is no definition who's the Jew. And second, I mean, when we talk about Islam, we are not talking about Islam. We are talking about political Islam. We are all Muslims in the region. I mean, I would say 95% of the people. And even my late mom, I mean, she was saying to me, what does they mean when they say political Islam or Islamic party? Aren't we a Muslim? You know, so there is Islam and political Islam, and I hope you make differentiation between the two. You are talking about the region at large, it's Islamic culture at least. Second, political Islam, I said you have to make differentiation between two. One, like all those political parties with Islamic ideologies who say we want to go like any political party, through democratic process. And that's why we are welcoming, I mean, all political parties who participated in the Egyptian elections, in the Tunisian elections, or in the Moroccan elections, and more to come. Islamist, political Islam, moderate Islam, I think they are based on a major bulk. And I want to remind everybody how these extremist Islamic parties came, Bin Laden style and the militants and who resort to force. When these Islamist parties for Muslim brotherhoods, which were established 83 years ago, were denied access to politics and were suppressed, oppressed, imprisoned, and killed for tens of years by these dictatorships, they said it's about time to resort to armed struggle against them. And that's the vital dimension. If you allow everybody, and that's the essence of democracy, the right of participation, say too, you have no problem with anybody. I don't care then whether he's Islamist, Buddhist, Christian, Jew, secular, Marxist. It's his problem. For each party, there is ideology as far it doesn't contradict basic fundamental rules or constitutional rules.
Well, I can't promise you to write a book to answer your question, but if I have to use only a few words, I would say this is a set of values, and these values are in fact shared by the three major books and other philosophical thoughts: respect of the human being, justice, equality, and so on. These basic human values, which have something in common, or should have something in common: tolerance.
There was another question from Tunisia here, from our viewers in Tunisia, which we appreciate. And while we're talking about Islamists, and since you just had the floor here, the question is from Sahim Bouaza. What about the supremacy, in quotes, the supremacy of the Islamic principles regarding the universal human rights principle in the new constitution, especially the Nadha saying, quote, no supremacy of international conventions?
Well, I think this is not a question of declarations, but the courts will have to say how they will interpret the international conventions, how they will interpret the constitution itself. So we have different point of views, but I think major parties agreed on a text, and then the interpretation could be different. I don't know. I cannot anticipate how the courts will do.
I want to get to more questions, but I just want to bring up one point here, because there's another question from Tunisia. And one of the things we really haven't talked about here is, obviously there was political oppression, but also poverty also led to these revolutions. If you look at the demographics in the Mideast, there is huge potential because you have a very young population. Something like 50% of the population is 24 years or younger. So there's a lot of potential there, but there's also a great need to educate. And I think this is a very interesting question, because unless you have economic transition, it's very tough, I think, to sustain democracies. And here's the question to all the panelists. This one is from Salma again in Tunisia. Do the Islamic movements in the Arab world have negative effects on foreign investments, in particular European investments? Do you want to take that question?
I think that, first of all, the economic challenges are enormous. Look at, in many countries in the region, unemployment since the revolutions have increased. It's gone up, sometimes almost doubled since the Arab Spring. So there is an economic impact. And I think that one of the things that foreign money and domestic money investors are looking for. They are looking for stability and predictability where they will put their money and their investments. And the government, whatever color it might have, Islamist or whatever, if it can bring stability to the country and there will be a stable investment climate, investors will come. Then, of course, just where are we today? We're in the middle of a crisis in the Eurozone and in other places in the world. Of course, it's maybe not the best of moments for markets to present themselves with new investment opportunities, but that has nothing to do with politics.
But we've seen pockets of this, be it in Morocco or other places, where people have become optimistic and then they put money into certain countries. Yeah. Question here, then we'll go back there, and Hans, and we'll get to you. And we have one right here. Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Agneta Boman. I'm ambassador and advisor at the Swedish Ministry for Foreign Affairs. I would like to ask a question regarding transitional justice in a broad sense, also reconciliation, peace, amnesty. Maybe a question for Mr. Annabi, the first hand. Of course, each country is unique, and each experience and also needs to address the atrocities in the past. But would you say that examples such as South Africa or Bosnia are interesting, or are examples from the region more relevant for Tunisia and for the region, such as the Truth Commission in Morocco? And on the other hand, when I was in Tunis a year ago, a prominent female politician just mentioned that a number of Tunisians were going to study that experience. On the other hand, you have the amnesty in Algeria leading to widespread impunity.
It's interesting you should mention a truth and reconciliation process, because one of the recommendations to come out of a meeting in Tunis regarding Libya was that should be part of the process. Thought, yeah.
Yes, I do agree with you, and I think it's inevitable to come to such a situation of transitional justice, and the process has started in Tunisia already. But what I would add, in my personal opinion, this should also include the economic crimes that took place, because in other countries it was basically on the human rights side, on the political reconciliation. But in my opinion, many of the economic crimes that took place during the dictatorship of Ben Ali were due to this system. And then we have to examine them within a different point of view from the traditional justice, yes.
Okay. Let's take another question here. Yes.
Hi, I'm Rodri Williams. I'm a legal consultant based in Stockholm. I'm doing some work on constitutional assistance with FBA, who I see in the room, and I'm also working in Libya with the UNHCR on land issues related to displacement. I just wanted to push the question of human rights and rule of law a little bit further, because I think there are a number of interesting aspects to it that have been touched on. On one hand, my sense from working in the region previously is that the situation in Israel and the perception of a severe international double standard there has badly eroded the significance of human rights as a sort of universal marker for constitutions, for instance, in many people's eyes. And I also have the sense that there are some serious tensions between a Islamic conception of human rights, as reflected, for instance, in the Cairo Declaration, and the sort of some of the basic standards of international human rights.
Your question.
Is that true?
Who wants to take that? It was he got to it in the end. Yeah.
You know, I do hate judgment always. Turkey, when it wanted to go and join EU, every time they were having negotiations, they were saying to them, but concerning human rights, you have to abolish death penalty. Concerning this, you have to do that. One day, the Turkish Foreign Minister was meeting delegation of FDH. And they say, what the European wants? And they said, your respect for human rights, blah, blah. He said, could you please do put that in one list for me? He said, yes. So they listed that, and he said, I agree. What are you going to do? And yet, I mean, Turkey hasn't been accepted to the EU. But this is, I mean, the same problem, I mean, with the political Islam. Islam interpretation as if Islam against the human rights. It's not true. It's not true. You ask any Islamist, are you against this, and that? He said to you, no. So there is something wrong in mind. Here, it should be taken out. I'm not taking, Islamist or political Islam are the super perfect. But I think they are open enough and ready enough. I'm personally based in Gaza. And what I say in Gaza, I say it in New York, I say it in Stockholm. No one of them ever, and some of these people in the hall know that, say to us, you are wrong, or we don't agree, or you have to shut, or you shouldn't speak that way. We are in the ground, we are doing that. We are not politically correct to anybody, and we are managing, with that. So every time, Islamists, might accept, might not accept the Islam anti-human rights. This is not true, and this is not real, and this sort of rhetoric really should stop and to respect the intelligence of the people at that part of the world.
Raji, if you're right, and you think that Islam will be the prevailing dominant force in the region for the next 20 years, and some countries might have Sharia law, like Egypt, others like Tunisia will have a French system, Libya perhaps, French system, so forth. But how can Sharia, as a legal norm, be reconciled with democracy, pluralism, and non-discrimination?
In this regard, you count on the real forces in the region. You count on people who struggled and continue to struggle and will struggle for rule of law, human rights, and democracy at that part of the world. We don't need the help of the West. We are strong enough to stand there and make the fight. This is the chemistry of democracy. We'll take it, and I don't think only jurists, human rights activists, civil society, but all forces who believe in that will fight to ensure that these standards are not thematic. It's on the ground and it's practical.
Okay. Do any of you in the audience here have concerns about a country using Sharia law as its basis of law? Raise your hand if you do. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. Several people. Yeah, Homer, you want to make a point or a question? Yeah.
Homer Moyer, the Sealy Institute in Prague. The question was earlier put to you about challenges that you face in the transitions. If we look back at other transitions from authoritarian rule to democracies, we see in hindsight some of the challenges that they faced. And I'd like to mention 3 and ask if you resonate particularly to any of those. One has been the slowness of judiciaries to develop into truly independent instruments of government and the protectors of the rule of law and individual rights. Another has been the lack of tradition, culture, habit of participation in government and all that goes with that, expectations, and participating in the democratic process by the public. And a third has been the difficulties in countries in accommodating, after transition, ethnic and religious differences within those countries and managing that. And my question is, do you see any of those, or which of those, or none of those, do you see as challenges in your context?
Samir.
Well, lack of participation in government, yes, of course. We have to learn how to do it. We weren't accustomed with this. We never had it in our day-to-day life. And this is the essence of dictatorship. So we have certainly a way to go to learn these practices and allow for tolerance, etc. As to the difficulties relating to ethnic and religious problems, I don't think these are serious matters, at least as far as Tunisia is concerned, because we have been living together for over 1,500 years. So I don't think there was any major clash between the different religious and ethnic communities in Tunisia. As to the judiciary, let me say that nobody can today define what is Sharia. There are so many differences about the boundaries of this corp of law. However, whether the judges will be independent enough to apply it or to interpret it, this is a matter of training, and this is why I think that training is a basic thing to ensure for the future of these countries.
And hence ILAC's participation, of course, in Tunisia. Jan, you want to make a point on this? Yeah, and then Raji.
On one of the questions you asked, I think it's very important to make the reforms and the changes visible to people, because most citizens in Sweden or elsewhere very rarely come in contact with the police, with the courts or with the judges. But what do they come in contact with? They come in contact with, hopefully, a functioning administration, delivering ID cards, driver's licenses, and other things. And that is, for most people, what they will see if they have a reliable service, free or as free as possible from corruption. There they will see the change, and they will probably get on board that train. So one has to do it at different levels. So the general functioning of a good, solid administration, free from the corruption element, or as free as possible, that is a very important part, I think, of that reform.
You make a very interesting point, because another question that we had from Tunisia was, what are the most important legal reforms that have to be made for a successful transition to democracy? And what you're suggesting is that the citizenry has to have confidence, even in the smallest ways, that they're free from corruption, and that's how you build. Yeah?
Yeah. And just before I give the floor to my colleague, I think that, what we get when I go to Libya or to Tunisia and other places, what people now ask us about, and that's an area where Sweden is fairly advanced, is e-government. And I was first surprised, why do they want e-government after coming out of revolution? But I very quickly understood that through e-government solutions, you actually minimize the different steps where corruption and other things can stop the process. And that's why suddenly they came to us, and of course we were happy about it. But there are these practical things that can actually make a difference for people, and that will show.
Very interesting, the point about the sort of using social media or the internet to help cut down on corruption. Raji, you may want to make a quick point, or yeah.
A and B. A, there is 2 countries only in the region who applies the Sharia, Saudi Arabia and Sudan. That's it. And I think they are the worst examples ever we have. And I think both are candidates, for real revolution, hopefully, which make it change. 2, in the Arab world at large, and for the revolution and the political Islam, I think one of the very standing issue to have secular state. I think imposing Sharia laws in the region will bring really drastic setback. We don't want to ask people to change their ideology, but we cannot have Sharia laws, and we have to make the secular state in place there.
So you share the fears of many who raised their hands when I asked that question about Sharia law.
No, I'm talking about different thing. I'm talking about whether, we are having Sharia. Yes, we're having Sharia in 2 states in the Arab world.
Right.
Saudi Arabia and Sudan. About the rest, none of them said, we are going to apply Sharia. I don't know about that. And if that would happen, I think that will be very drastic setback.
I just wonder if you allow me to put one question to the floor.
Yes, of course. And then
Why are you disturbed about Islamic rule in some of these countries, whereas here in Europe you have the Christian Democrats? Have you ever thought in making a comparison between these 2 systems? Why, when it comes to Islam, you stop, and then when you talk about Christian democracy, you say nothing?
the Greeks
It's
fear the
something.
Christian Democrats. Yeah. Okay, Kadim, you want to make a quick point here? Then Hans has a point he wants to make, and then we'll get to Shelley here. Yeah, very quickly, yeah.
Thank you, Todd.
Yeah.
My name is Kadim Lami. I am a solicitor, individual member of ILAC. I would like to ask colleagues, what is Sharia? Sharia there is no code called Sharia. It is only instructions made by some Gulf states, let us say. Sharia is not Quran. Quran, maybe they follow, they take some points from Quran, they said this is Sharia. This is not law, never, ever. Only as Mr. Sourani said, implemented in Saudi Arabia and in other, some Sudan. But Saudi Arabia, when it has a contract made between the state and ExxonMobil, for instance, they go and the instructions that they go to the arbitration, not the Sharia. Sharia, they denied Sharia.
So your question, please.
The question is, there is nothing Sharia, but Sharia is only just, not in Tunisia, not in other countries. They don't use Sharia.
Okay.
Thank you.
Hans, you had a question, and then we'll get to Shelley.
Thank you very much. A point of information also that will soon be published by the Hans Corell, former legal counsel of the United Nations, a book published by the International Bar Association and the Salzburg Seminar on Islamic law. It's a very interesting contribution to the understanding of Islamic law. My question concerns something that you have not discussed so far. Every time I ask friends in the Muslim world about how women are treated, is it tradition or is it a religion? The answer, after some discussion, is it's actually a tradition. So it was in our countries here also. There is a direct correlation between the standing of women in a country and the level of development of that country. And what do you think about the future here? When I translate the way women are treated in many of these countries, I translate it into a lack of development, a lack of advancement, translated also into youth unemployment and so forth. So I think this is one of the most important elements in creating a democratic society here. Empowerment of women, empowerment of women, empowerment of women.
Okay. Yeah. Okay. Please. Shelley. Yeah.
Actually, Shelby Quast, individual member with ILAC. And it's a follow-up to what Hans just said. And you talked quite a bit about the revolution being a fight for dignity and human rights, and people were fighting shoulder to shoulder. And many women's rights organizations in the region are very fearful that there's a back of women's rights, that they're not seeing this being implemented for dignity and human rights for women now. And what's your response to them? How do those attitudes get changed?
I don't think it is a matter of religion. I would say to the contrary, Islam liberated the women, gave the women their rights, and they only look at some traditional ways of thinking, some traditional practices that have nothing to do with the religion itself, but rather with local tradition. And that exists everywhere, not only in the Islamic or Arab countries.
May I add something? I mean, I'll give concrete example. about tradition and religion. Honor killing, everybody consider it as something genuine Islam. Honor killing related to Islam. And Islamists do practice that. You know, actually, it's 180 degrees against Islam. In Islam, it's called dishonor killing. If you take it from Islamic point of view, if something happened related to honor, etc., we have to make it privately, and we have to fix things rightly through marriage, through this and that, and because honor, something very, very sensitive in Islam. That's why if this honor killing happened, the Islamists call it, it's dishonor. There is things are mixed up. Since, for example, Hamas took over and we are monitoring every case by case, things, dropped down drastically because they won't allow it. In Arab countries, the judiciary system, they say if it's honor killing, this is not really homicide. You can take up to 18 to 24 month imprisonment. So as if the existing judiciary and legal system encouraging doing that. If you will take 18 months or 24 months, that's fine. Now, in some more land educated systems, they take it as homicide, and by that they stop it. So it's not really related to Islam. There is quite a lot of misconceptions in relation to that.
Roger, we've got time for one final question here. Then there's one from Tunisia again, and I have a final one. Yeah, very quickly.
My name is Roger Chongwe, and I come from Zambia, and I'm a member of ILAC. I would like to find out from my friends who are participating in this debate, because I do know that at the end of the day, apart from the ambassador, some of you will be part of the government of the countries where you come from. Now, can I have some assurance, since we are all lawyers in this room, that being leaders in our own countries, having defeated the dictators, that we will, as far as possible, respect the Universal Declaration of Human Rights as has been respected or is being respected by all countries of the world, including their covenants. If I can get that assurance, then the questioner from Tunisia, who was talking about the superiority of the domestic law over the international human rights instruments, will have been answered. Lastly, is it really true? And I'm glad, Mr. Sourani, that you actually jumped around because of the effect of the Arab Spring. Don't you realize that if we do it, if we act correctly, fairly, that in fact that might give about some respectability of the work that you are doing in the Palestinian state? That in fact Hamas, if Hamas wins next time, then that victory will be respected.
Do you want to comment very quickly? I think you are trying to champion human rights. So I don't think you're. I think you're promoting it. In fact, we've got one more question from Tunisia here. What are the main problems that you're facing in terms of the Anti-Corruption Commission in Tunisia? What are the main problems you're facing, and what are the chances of success? You're one of the good guys, so we'll give you
Okay, I'll answer Roger's question first. Well, I tell you one thing, that the Supreme Court of Tunisia, what we call Cour de Cassation, has issued two decisions about a year and a half ago and about a year ago, telling that the international conventions or treaties have a higher ranking than the ordinary laws, including matters touching the family law. As to the second question regarding the corruption, I am not well aware of all the cases because I just took over and we are in the process of forming the commission, so it might take a few days before we know what are the big challenges and what we are going to do. What I can promise now is that we will respect everyone and we will treat people equally.
I want to end on two final areas. Both are very contentious, very sensitive, but I think we need to address them because we've talked about a lot of different things today and made a lot of great points have been made. I want to move to Syria for a moment. What should the international community's response to Syria be, outside perhaps dismantling the UN Security Council? Okay, but what can the international community be doing that it's not doing perhaps to bear pressure to try and end the violence there? That's my first question, and then I have a follow-up question on Libya. Raji, your thoughts on this very quickly.
I think what's happening in Libya, in Syria, very real revolution. And there is real people on the ground who's doing the fight on day-to-day basis. I think this wasn't triggered only a year ago. The struggle against the Syrian regime who committed atrocities, war crimes, crimes against humanity has been for a quite long period of time. And I think, the interventions brought some drastic setbacks, meaning jumping of Qatar and Syria and Saudi Arabia as advocates for democracy and human rights. That was very ugly and unacceptable. Two, the West position vis-à-vis Syria, very simple. The opposition divided, we cannot help them. They have to help themselves. What I'm suggesting, just as simple as that, international community should act according to the recognized international standards, international law, international humanitarian law, and to take the position vis-à-vis the Syrian regime and the struggle vis-à-vis the regime, that something should be taken over as it is going on by entire opposition.
Jan, of course, in the introduction of Christian, he said that you were involved in the crisis in Syria. Your thoughts very quickly in terms of what the international community or even legal community, international legal community could be doing that's not being done that could help perhaps ameliorate some of the suffering that's going on there.
I think that what we should be doing right now, and actually what we are doing, is we should put our support and our strength behind the mission of of Kofi Annan, the joint UN Arab League envoy, and to put our support and our hope in bringing that plan ahead. Then, of course, that there are many things that we have discussed today that are relevant for Syria, for a future Syria, whatever Syria will look like. And I think I said earlier that some of the issues that countries in the region are confronted with now, if one had started discussing them early on, they could maybe have gone quicker in their developments. And that's questions of legal reform. It's about the constitution. It's about women's rights and women's position, the role of the youth, etc. But I fully understand that people in Syria, wherever they are on the political map, in the situation that they're living in today, maybe these are not the first things that come to their mind, but they are important issues already now.
Samir, want to add anything to that?
Well, I'll come closer to my country and about Libya. I don't think...
No, Syria.
Syria, I totally share the views of my colleagues here, and they have a better knowledge of what's taking place in Syria.
Because I want to ask a question about Libya. I want to ask all of you out here, because we really didn't talk much about Libya today. And they are at the crossroads. And the decision that's made on the following question I'm going to ask you could have huge ramifications. How many of you feel that Saif Gaddafi should be tried in Libya? Raise your hand. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many of you feel that the ICC should try him at The Hague? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A lot more than those who feel he should be tried on national soil. Now, I realize that the legal system in Libya has a lot of issues. You don't want to have a repeat of what you had, which happened in Iraq with Saddam Hussein.
I want to have a point, if you don't mind. I think Mr. Okambo Korombo, the ICC prosecutor, he damaged seriously the image of the ICC through the policies he made. He mixed between politics and rule of law. I'm somebody who worked on the ICC convention 10 years between New York and Geneva, back and forth. And I'm genuinely, committed to that when it was a draft proposed to the Human Rights Council at that time. Now, this was adopted and taken over, and two states who didn't ratify that, Israel and US, neither signing or ratifying, though they were the ones who intervened genuinely in Rome Convention. Anyway, when it comes to Libya, out of the blue, and within a week, this was taken, General Assembly, Security Council, resolution to the ICC, Gaddafi were a criminal, he should be prosecuted there. Out of the blue. Within a week. Now, flashback what the region look at. Cast-led operation in Gaza, 1,186 people, civilians, children, women has been killed. Almost 8,000 houses has been destroyed, universities, factories, hospitals, schools, name it.
So your point is...
No, I'm coming to that. Now, this all was stated not by Palestinian or Israeli human rights organization, but by international body. Goldstone report from the Human Rights Council. And he said within 6 months, if Israel didn't investigate these war crimes and crimes against humanity, they should be referred to the Security Council and from there to the ICC. 3.5 years passed since cast-led operation ended, and 3 years since Goldstone report has been stated. What's the result?
But I'm asking about Libya here.
In April, late April, His Excellency Okambo came in a press conference just 1 month before he leaves. And he said, gentlemen, Palestine has no state status. If they have, they should be decided by the General Assembly. And we, as ICC, has no authority on that. He closed cast-led operation file vis-a-vis ICC, and he left it in the hand of politicians. And he didn't take only one advantage to refer it to the first chamber at the ICC. This is the politicization of international law. Such person, I have no guarantee and no respect on the professional and the credible level to have the file at his hand. There is revolution and there is souvenir government. They can take care of this file, whether within their national capacity or they can be held, by a regional or international body.
So you favor that being done on a national level. Do you fear that there can be a fair trial on a national level?
Yes, I think so, by perhaps an ad hoc tribunal, which could have some international collaboration.
Hybrid, yeah. Jan, your thoughts on this?
I don't think that Sweden's position on the ICC is any secret, but and on these issues. But what you are evoking is actually a wider issue. You're evoking the issue of transitional justice.
That's right.
And how that will be handled. And one thing is the cases that one of them that you cited, and there are others on the plate of the court. But when it comes to transitional justice issues, it also has to be something that the countries have to look at themselves, and they have to. I mean, you have to find the balance on the total. As my friend from Tunisia was saying, how do you handle the cases? How do you handle the let's say cleaning up of the past to go ahead to the future?
But this is also a very complex issue because, in a sense, if you want to promote democracies, if you don't allow a trial on home soil, you're saying that you're not worthy of being responsible, and you don't allow a type of reconciliation which may be important for the healing of the country, like you had vis-a-vis in South Africa. Hans, you want to just jump in here?
There is no recipe for reconciliation usually in any given country.
Yeah, it's on. Go.
Hello? Hello, yes. Maybe I should clarify, as the Secretary General's representative at the Rome Conference back in 1988, the matter is really at the feet of the Security Council. They have to apply the same yardstick when they discuss whether to engage the International Criminal Court. And I'm very upset about the situation in the Middle East. Yes, they asked the court to engage in the Sudan. They asked the court to engage in the situation in Libya, but not in the Middle East, although the situation was just as serious there. And you said, Benjamin, in the beginning here, that to dismantle the Security Council when you talked about Syria, I think one should look at it in a different way. The whole world should also put the Security Council, and in particular the 5 permanent members, against the wall and really challenge them. They have the mandate by the whole membership of the UN to be responsible for international peace and security. Do they perform these tasks with the sufficient standards? I don't believe so in all situations. And therefore, I think it's important that the Security Council be told that they should first of all themselves bow to the law that they are set to supervise, that they should not use the veto unless their very innermost security concerns are at stake. Number 3, not use force unless in the 2 situations authorized by the Charter. And number 4, engage in responsibility to protect. This, at a common standard and a common yardstick, this is what we need. Thank you.
I think it's one thing that's come out very clearly today. I'm sorry, Nina, you want to make a quick point here because I saw you whispering to Shelley, it was not black and white. Okay, jump in here.
Actually,
we're going to give you the last word here. Okay.
When you asked the question about what the international community can do, I mean, we tend to think in a formal term, the context of the Security Council, etc. We can recall historically that the international community, the civil society, prominent organizations from Amnesty to Human Rights Watch to entities like this, can also appeal from the grassroots for dialogue and support for the Annan Plan. And I wonder, given what we see, if nothing else on TV alone, why hasn't the chords of human compassion and outrage struck reputable civil society organizations and the population in general? It's just, I mean, of course, it's a matter for the Security Council and legislative bodies of the international community, but there's also room for civil society and reputable organizations to speak out, and I wonder why that's not happening when so many think that the Annan Plan is the way to go and a cessation of hostilities must happen before more and more civilian lives are lost. So I'd be interested in why that's not happening.
Yeah. Why do you think that's not happening? Jan, you have a very interesting perspective here. Yeah.
I can't say why the international civil society or the international organizations. I think they are in a way, but maybe not in the concerted way that you are requesting. So I mean, I can't answer on their behalf.
Let me just jump in here for 1 second, because I think, we talked a little bit about social media. In a sense, it was very important to the evolution of the Arab Spring. People using Twitter, Facebook, all sorts of means, all right? Then you talk about how the e-commerce and the internet will also play a role in cutting corruption in certain countries. In some ways, let me just throw this out here, I'm being a bit provocative, social media may be the biggest killer of revolutions. And what I mean by this is that a lot of people are becoming much more passive in the West. They're spending so much time on their screens, they don't feel that if they click the Joseph Kone viral campaign, they've done their bit for the revolution. They're not willing to do anything beyond. And I think that's the downside also of social media. You raise a great question. Why isn't the civil population more moved by this? Don't know if it's crisis fatigue or selfishness or whatever, but it's perhaps something we can discuss more at dinner tonight among some of you. What is clear here, at ILAC you have a very committed group of lawyers who are involved in Tunisia and other places. We have a very committed group of panelists. I just want to thank everybody for their participation today. A lot of great points were made, and I wish you best of luck in rebuilding all your countries. And thank you to our viewers in Tunisia and our other students in Sweden. It's been a terrific discussion. I'm Todd Benjamin. Thank you for your time.
Thank you.
Very good. Thank you. Thank you. Good job. Yeah.